Welcome back to the Messy Reformation. My name's Jason Rice, and I'm the lead pastor at Faith Community CRC in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. My co-host is Willie Cronky. He's a member at Pease CRC in Pease, Minnesota. We're just a couple of guys who love the Christian Reformed Church and want to see Reformation happen in our denomination. But we realize that whenever Reformation happens in the history of the church, things get messy. And things continue to be messy in the Christian Reformed Church. So we're taking the opportunity to have conversations with pastors throughout the Christian Reformed Church to find out what's going on in our denomination, but also to talk about what Reformation might look like. It's also important for you to know that you are our marketing plan. We rely on you to spread the word about what we're doing at the Messy Reformation. We rely on you to share our content. And we rely on you to give us 5-star reviews and give good feedback for our podcast. You are the marketing plan. You can also support us financially on Patreon or Substack. All of the money raised is used to further the mission and the platform of the Messy Reformation. With all that said, we're going to get to this week's episode, which is part 1 of a conversation between Willie, Dan, and I about Reformed ecclesiology and the 2025 Messy Reformation Conference. Well, we're kicking off this podcast a little differently again. It's been a while since me and Willie and Dan have all been on the podcast together. I think last time was actually right after Synod, and we were reflecting on some of the Synod stuff, so about 6 months ago. But we wanted to start off this new year having an episode with us three talking about our upcoming conference, really, and just wanting to talk about why we're doing the conference again this year, wanting to talk about what makes our conference different and why we've put it together that way. And then we want to have a little conversation on Reformed ecclesiology, which is really going to be the focus of the conference. So I'll just kick it off. I'll ask Willie to just jump in first. Willie, why are we doing a conference again this year?
I thought it was because we had nothing better to do. But since that's not the case.
Yes, we're all bored. We just need to find something to do.
I think our purpose of this really speaks to really the purpose of our name, Messy Reformation. And that is, we truly believe that a Reformed hermeneutic, the Reformed faith, Reformed theology really speaks to the heart of how we view the world. And that affects things. That affects our doctrine of God. It affects our doctrine of the church. It affects our doctrine of the sacraments. I mean, it affects all of these things. And as we have noticed, these things tend to be maybe not very well researched or practiced as much in the modern Reformed churches, or at least the denomination that we're in. So I think the purpose of this is just generally to create awareness. But I also think the greater purpose is so that we can be reforming, even in a messy manner, ways in which we can embetter the Christian Reformed Church in North America. And we do that in several ways. And in this conference, we're looking at doing that in our doctrine of what the church looks like.
Yeah, and it really, as we've thought about the mission of the Messy Reformation, we've really felt like this fits very clearly with what we want to do as a podcast. Our mission is to, lead Reformation in the Christian Reformed Church by encouraging and strengthening church leaders to be engaged and bold in the fight for biblical and confessional fidelity. And we want to accomplish that by networking like-minded church leaders, giving them tools for the battle, and then painting a vision for what Reformation looks like. And we do that through our podcast on a regular basis and by interviewing pastors throughout the Christian Reformed Church. But we've also realized what better way to really network like-minded pastors and believers then through a conference, and then we can get together. We can not only network at this conference, but we can also begin to give people tools that we need in this reformation of the church.
This is kind of what we accomplished, I think, last year, is we started talking about, what are some ways in which you're training your elders, your deacons? How are you doing the, missional types of ministries? And this is another thing that we wish to accomplish. We want to be a resource for the churches. It's not just we want to be doing things in our local contexts, although that's true. We want to be helping other pastors, elders, deacons, church leaders, even denominational leaders, giving them resources and the tools to be able to implement some of these things where they're at. So I think that's, you kind of hit on that. We like to exchange tools. And I think the more tools we can have in our arsenal, the better prepared we'll be for Reformation.
Yeah, you think about, quite a few of our guests lately have been talking about the gathering and their opportunity to go to that with the denomination, with different classes. And this provides a great opportunity for something like that. What I hear when I listen is that people are coming together and they're getting to hear about things. And I think what our conference seeks to do, as Willie just said, is not just equip, but then also share and to develop. And some of the things that we'll get into are, as we look at like brainstorming, like what can we do to better equip people so that it's not just the conference attenders or the convention attenders that are getting something out of this, but what can we take home and how can we then bring that into our churches and our councils to further the work that needs to be done. We've spent a lot of time at Synod, the three of us have, and Synod is busy, a lot of business happening, but actually building people up. Yes, there's an encouragement that you take away from it, but to actually build people up in resource is such an important thing in the time that we're in.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things one of the tensions maybe we're trying to hold in our conference, one of the things I think makes our conference different from actually really any conference I've been a part of is we're trying to hold this balance between giving people opportunity to just get together, to connect and to have conversations, but more than that, to give them some content to be able to chew on, to kind of prime the pump for deeper conversations. And so we have free time mixed in. We have, we only have a couple of plenary sessions scheduled. So we have a plenary at the beginning and a plenary at the end, but then the middle of the conference is really going to be more group learning discussion times on each of the different aspects of Reformed ecclesiology. And again, because sometimes I know for myself, I love going to conferences, but sometimes I can come away from a conference just being exhausted and like, I don't want to sit there and listen to people talk for, 8 hours a day necessarily. I want content. I want to get, some bang for my buck, I guess. But really I don't want to walk away completely wore out. I want to be able to talk about some of this. And so that's what we're trying to do by having like a plenary right away at the beginning to kick things off, to get your minds going, and then to have some opportunity in kind of small groups to be able to discuss these things further, and then bring it back to a larger group.
It's the whole iron sharpening iron thing, right? And the thing that I appreciate about, I would say, the diverse range of spiritual giftedness in our denomination is that one strength in another church may be an area where another church is weak. And that's something that I've really appreciated, learning from different leaders who have different weaknesses and different skill sets, to be able to say, I need my blind spots filled in, and I need them filled in by somebody who doesn't share those same blind spots. So I really appreciate getting to understand, what are some ways in which you're, maybe doing outreach ministry in your church, because that's something my church is really struggling at right now. Or you have a really dynamic and discipleship-oriented youth program. I want to have that in my church. How are you guys doing this? And, I think we really excel in our liturgy and how we implement, our Reformed, confessions and everything into our worship services. And I really think we need to be doing more of this idea sharing so that our churches can all look monolithic. But there is something really special about the Reformed faith, the Reformed accent, if you will. And I think that's something that needs to be commonly shared in our churches all throughout the CRCNA.
Well, I think, Willie, you just mentioned about gifts and the differences in gifts that we have. But I think also interest and even theology, I'm our conference is kind of based around Bavinck and his thought, and we're going to get into that a little bit later. But I'm the newbie when it comes to Bavinck, and I guess I say that ashamedly. I didn't get Bavinck in seminary or anything like that, and so I'm coming at it with fresh eyes. But what little I've read of him so far, I'm like, oh, this is why this is, again, Bavinck isn't the whole of it, but kind of the thought that Bavinck brings is what a lot of traditional CRC Reformed polity has kind of been based around. And so there's people like me, and I know there's a lot of other people who have come into the denomination who don't necessarily even have a Reformed background whatsoever, and just assume like, oh, this old way of doing things, there's no reason to do it that way. But no, like there's something good. And so I think part of what we have to offer when we resource is to say, hey, this is where it's rooted. This was the thought that went into it. Right? We have the confessions, and so many people have talked about how they love the confessions, but to actually have kind of the broader spectrum of Reformed thought, I think is a great thing that we have to offer and to share with one another then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're such people who like to talk theology. We're already trying to jump into that, and I didn't want to quite get there quite yet. And I almost just wanted to take the conversation there too, but we're going to get there. So, but I do still want to talk about like what's one of the things that you guys think makes our conference a little more unique than some of the other conferences you've been a part of.
I'll kick that off. I say this with much and deep appreciation for the conferences I have attended or the conventions I've attended. I think one thing that makes us a little bit different is we're a little more interactive. I think that's one difference, and maybe that's the wrong word, but that's just the word that I'm going to use right now. I appreciate going places where I'm hearing a lecture, someone expounding on something, and I'm being sharpened by that. I'm being edified by that. I think the church desperately needs that, and that's why conferences like that are so widely attended. I think that's fantastic. I think what we offer is slightly different in that we might do those things, but another thing that we add is a lot of interactive things. We have more elongated workshops, if you will, and just times where we can, even disagree with each other. We're like, no, I'm not really sure that he gets this point right, because I think that's good for the church too. I think it's good for us to be, trained and corrected so that the man of God may be complete and equipped for every good work, per 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. So I think that is one distinction in our conferences. We're a bit more interactive. It's more of a dialogue and less of a monologue, if you will.
Yeah, I think too, we've been intentional about building kind of the retreat aspect into this. As last year, Jason and I had the opportunity to go to the Coram Deo conference out in Charlotte. Been to the Gospel Coalition Conference. It's been a while now. It's been 7 years, I think. But in both of those, the lodging is spread out. You got to travel in. You got to go out to a restaurant to grab food for your meals. And what we do is that we have everyone literally we're lodging in the same building where we're meeting at. And I think Ligonier is kind of like that, but obviously this is a much smaller scale, and that's awesome, right? We get the opportunity to focus on ourselves, to focus on the Reformation that we're a part of. Not like Willie said, not to say that any other conference is bad or that it can't be positive and beneficial and uplifting for us. But I love that opportunity to retreat, to rest. We have ample time for free time. I think last year I think about how people could kind of come in whenever they wanted on the Monday afternoon that we started on, but also on the second day, we're building in some free time. So whether you want to network or walk the grounds or what have you, it's a beautiful location at the Green Lake Conference Center. So
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. And, all of those reasons are what, I've spent a lot of time up at the Green Lake Conference Center because it's close to my house. And so they know me by name up there. When I call, they know exactly what room I'm going to request because I spend a lot of time in kind of prayer and reflection and solitude up there. And every time I've done that, though, I've thought, man, this is the perfect place to do a conference like this because there's so much. It's on this, Green Lake is a huge, beautiful lake. And I think they've got like 900 acres maybe or something. So you can walk. There's trails all over. And so you can get out and enjoy nature, or you can chill in a lot of the different rooms. And it's just, that's why we're trying to balance, again, giving good content. There's a reason for you to come besides just to relax, but also giving you plenty of free time. Yeah, Monday and Tuesday afternoons are wide open. And then we try to wrap everything up pretty early in the evening as well, because we want the evenings to really be focused on networking or just basically hanging around, having these kind of conversations, processing some of the stuff we've talked about throughout the day, and then trying to figure out how to apply that to your life and to your church. Because the reality is, none of it makes it. If all we do is come and just hear about things and go, wow, that was an interesting talk, and then you walk away and are not changed, right? James says, well, you're like a man who sees himself in the mirror and forgets what he looks like, right? We're called to be doers of the words, not hearers only. And so we want to try to factor that into this conference as well.
And there's something. Go ahead. There's multiple great meeting spaces here, right? So we have like our main room that we were meeting in last year for the messages, for the workshops, but also for meals. But like there's a beautiful lobby, but then on each floor of this building, as long as they're available, there's some smaller areas that a group can gather. And so if you want to break off, you can go to a certain area. But I mentioned that too. I think about last year, there were a couple of wives that came along, a couple of the spouses from the group. And it's a great opportunity for fellowship there too, right? I mean, I don't think any of our wives were there, whether due to work or childcare or there's other things going on at this time of the year. But it really is a great opportunity that it isn't just meant for pastors. But if you want to come along as a wife or I guess as a husband too, like you could come along and tag along with your spouse and hopefully, again, that there will be some other spouses there to mingle with and to enjoy that conference and time with.
Yeah, you hit on everything I was going to say. I was just going to add, there's something really spiritual about a Canadian Bible study.
That's right.
That's it.
I'm glad you had to throw that in there. Well, I want to move because I don't want to make this too much like some promotional thing. I want to move into the reason why we're focusing on. Really, it started off with a discussion or decision to focus on Reformed ecclesiology, or if you don't know what that is, just a Reformed understanding, Reformed theology of the church. And last year it was a little more practical, I would say, or pragmatic maybe, talking about courageous leadership and that kind of a thing. But this time we wanted to kind of dive really deep into these principles of what it means to be a Reformed church. So what do you guys think? What was some of the reasoning behind why we wanted to focus on Reformed ecclesiology?
I'll take a stab at that going first. I think primarily because of where we're at in our denomination right now. I think obviously we have multiple tiers or levels, if you will, to our denomination. You know, we have the synodical level, we have the classical level, and then we have the local assemblies. And really that already kind of shows our hand a little bit. That shows we have a Presbyterian ecclesiology, and that has implications. And some of that is based on not just the decisions that the last few synods have had, but also we have been recognizing for quite a long time. You know, Jason and I, you and I used to have these conversations about, we really want to start something so that, we can continue to, give church leaders tools to actually disciple their congregants and their councils. And that, I think, is, it's a different understanding if you have a Presbyterian ecclesiology. I'll say that. Because if you have a Congregationalist church, you have 51% basically overriding the 49. And if you have more of a, monarchical setting, then, the pastor is essentially a law unto himself. And then you have denominations that are kind of a hybrid of both. But really, what we're trying to do is basically say, no, God has given the church specific leaders. He's given the church elders. He's given the church, a presbytery, pastors who shepherd the flock of God that are underneath their care. And ultimately, they are accountable to him for that. And we see these things in the book of Acts, in the pastoral epistles, when Paul is expounding on these things. And that just comes from our certain way of reading scripture and saying, we think this is how the church is defined. These are the parameters that the church operates in, and these are the spheres of her authority given by Christ himself. So I think that's why it's important to have a reformed understanding of what the church is and why we're focusing on this so much.
Yeah, I think it broadens out beyond polity too. We've thought about how there's, as we look at the CRC more and more, there's diversity in the action of worship that's happening among congregations. There's differences in what people are being attracted to and kind of what people are gravitating to as you listen to different parts of the country, different classes. And I think so with that, we're wondering, we mentioned a reformed accent. Like, part of this is going back to the basics of what does it mean for us to be distinctly reformed? A lot of, I think, represented, at least in Jason and I's churches, maybe up in P's as well, we have a lot of people who don't have a Reformed background necessarily, who came from non-denom, who came from Baptist, who came from Brethren, whatever it might be, and they come to our churches and they hear the preaching, they meet the people and they say, oh, this seems exactly what I grew up with, or if they have more of a Baptist bent usually. And yet there's something you have to explain the distinctions that exist, and yet people are, as Willie just said, people are finding something that resonates with the Word of God in what we do. But what does it mean to be distinctly reformed? I think to be well rooted and grounded in that is something we offer. That we want people to know. It's not just that, hey, here's a worshiping body that you can go to, and I like the people, they're friendly, and so I'm going to connect with them every week for a year. We have a reason for doing what we do.
Yeah. And I would say too, kind of underneath that, one of the comments that has been made really repeatedly for the last few years is that the CRC has this identity crisis, right? And that there are lots of people saying, well, this is what it means to be reformed, or this is what it means to speak with a reformed accent, or this is what it means to be a reformed church. And a lot of people will hear that and say, that's not what I think a reformed church is, or that's not. And so we've kind of lost the understanding of what a reformed church is. And really, in my mind, one of the best ways to begin to recover that is to dive deep down into the kind of foundational principles of what a reformed church is. And so, and that can help clear up some of that confusion by just getting down to the brass tacks of what that is. And of course, we're focusing in on Bavinck. We're willing to, we'll bring in other theologians as well, but Bavinck is the GOAT. He's the ultimate guy on this. And so we just wanted to kind of use his theological book to give some structure to our conference. And to really lay out the basics of what it means to be a Reformed church. Because, again, if the foundation is gone, or if the foundation is all busted up, everything that gets built on top of that gets really wonky. And I think that's what we're really seeing happen in a lot of churches, that they've lost the understanding of what a Reformed church is, and they've actually place that definition not on the principles, but on all of these other things built on top of that.
I think that's for sure. And one of the things that I think something can be found in taking some of these resources away or this information is you say, wow, that was such a helpful conference. They gave me all these tools and we got to learn some of Boving's theology. That is so wonderful. And my church looks nothing like that. So I think a tendency that some people have, and I'm one of these people myself, I'll confess, is to come away sort of pessimistic, understanding that the materials that have been given to me are kind of set as, maybe the ideal standard, and my setting falls very short of that. But again, when we're talking about being reformational, then we're not just talking about a reformed ecclesiology, but we're talking about, reform and always reforming. It's boots on the ground. How do you implement these things on your local level, even on the classical level, even the synodical level? Our church order, much of which our commentaries actually come from Boving himself, if you read close enough. It really speaks to how some of these bodies are supposed to be functioning. So this has implications on no matter what assembly you're speaking about.
Yeah, I would say too, one of the other things that I've heard a number of times, I think in the midst of our identity crisis on what it means to be reformed, there's also another kind of crisis is maybe too strong of a word here, but I would say confusion around the idea of what it means to be a denomination as well. And so I've heard this line used, well, I've heard both of these lines used multiple times in the last number of months. I've heard one say, well, denominations are supposed to be doing such and such. And then the person will come back and say, no, that's not what denominations do. Denominations do blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, we don't really even know right now what a denomination is supposed to be, what a denomination is supposed to do. And again, you can't just jump into that. And we don't just start coming up with random ideas on how this works. It all has to build upon the foundational, fundamental understanding of what is the church in the first place. And so I think part of our goal is to lay some of those foundations and then slowly work our way into some of these broader conversations about what does it look like in our churches? And then what does it look like in our classes? And what does it look like in the denomination as a whole? So that we can be faithful in doing what God has called us to do.
Yeah, one of the hardest things for a church, but even more so for classes, is to pass down communication, right? I love creating I did standard operating procedure when I worked in camp ministry. I love creating documents now. But if I'm the only one that's holding on to those and I don't pass them along well, the person who's going to take over after me starts from ground zero and has no idea why we've done what we've done in the past. And I think in talking with people, one of the opportunities I've had lately is to kind of dive into the whole commission pastor office and how that developed, where that came from, and what that means to different people. And so talking to older folks that, elders that have been around since, been serving in office since like the 80s, they have a very distinct view of what things are and of why things are a certain way. I come in and yes, I've been born and raised in the CRC, but didn't come into ordination till the mid 2010s. And I don't necessarily have as much baggage as they might with a certain topic. Now that could mean that I just cause trouble and say, well, this is how we're going to do it now. But there's a reason why things were done the way they were in the past. And so I think going back in history to a historical theologian in our denomination, or at least well connected to our denomination, really does help us to understand kind of the history and why we've done what we've done over the decades that we've been around.
And I think when this happens, the church, I'll put it the other way. When those things aren't being done, you're actually being a poor steward of the giftedness and the information that God has given you. And I think the church is impoverished. When you don't have, like you're kind of saying, it's the spectrum of experience, of information, and of education. What are we called to do? What's the mission of the church? Ultimately, it's to fulfill the Great Commission. All authority is Christ's, and it's on that basis he says there, now get out there and disciple the nations. And I think if you're not doing those things, then the church is derelict of her responsibilities and duties to Almighty God. So I completely resonate with what you're saying, and just call us to remember our purpose.
Yeah, and I mean, part of what we have to continue, one of the things we've done, I guess, repeatedly on this podcast is ask the question, how did we get here? Right? How did we get to this place where we've lost some of these things? And it's not just to kind of complain and moan about it, but really trying to understand, how did we fall into this position, and then how can we make sure this doesn't happen again in another 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? We want to build, can I use this phrase? Can we build back better? We want to make sure that we can do that as we're going through this Reformation, right? And again, a big part of the reason why somewhat, as I was thinking today on my walk, I was realizing, denominations do follow the typical patterns of any kind of an organization, right? Where they grow old, they kind of die unless some new life is injected into this organization. And so the CRC has kind of gone through that, where there's a period of excitement and growth, and then people just start assuming that everybody knows things, and then it doesn't get taught, and then nobody knows the things, and then it dies. And the only way to bring that around is through kind of injecting a lot of energy and time to recover it, right? That's how you revitalize a church too, is through discipleship in God's word. And that's, I think, how we have to revitalize a denomination as well, is through getting back to the basics, back to the principles of this, and then discipling people more and more, and just being reminded of who we are as a church and who we are as a denomination. And so, yeah, that's why we're doing this conference, is to try to help, kind of throw our oar in the water there, try to do our part. We're not thinking this conference is going to change the face of the denomination, but it's our little way of saying, hey, God has laid something on our heart, and we want to do something to kind of help get some of these conversations going, and we have something unique to offer here that's not being offered in the CRC anywhere else that I know of. So what do you guys think? As we've been preparing, we're not coming into this either. Like, you're not going to come to the Messy Reformation and get the world's top scholars on Reformed ecclesiology. I mean, we're close, but we're not. We're like,
yep, we're close.
We're right under top tier. No, we're your average Joe pastors and non-pastors who love this stuff. And but what you're going to get are some average Joe guys who love this and are studying it and want to be able to share some of that with you. And then obviously, part of the reason why we're doing these interactive workshops is because we believe that we're not the smartest people in the room, and we've got, when we bring people together, I think maybe this is getting into the theology of this. I've had a pretty strong opinion that I think the Holy Spirit speaks stronger through groups of people than through individuals, right? That's part of our ecclesiology when we get up into broader assemblies as well. And so the benefit of us doing our conference this way is you're not listening to one person standing up there saying this is the only way, but we have a group of people trying to discern through the power of the Spirit what God is teaching us in His Word about who we are as the church. And so we think having these interactive workshops actually is going to help better equip people than having the world's top scholars here, to be honest. But as we're working already, we're starting to kind of prepare some of our sessions and stuff. We've been diving deep into Bavinck for a little bit, and we'll be continuing to do that through April. What are some of the things that have been jumping out at you guys and kind of striking you as you've been preparing this now?
Yeah, I'll go. So one of my topics is going to be the government of the church, and in that, I even before, what I've been doing again more work on is kind of commissioned pastor stuff, and so back in the 1970s, 1973, the CRC synod, like I don't know how they got their work done because there was a ton of stuff, but one of those things was looking at basically office and kind of what it is we believe when it comes to the offices of minister, elder, and deacon, and any others that would be considered. And with that, there was a shift, and I would say it probably was happening before then already. But you can see in this is going to be really nerdy, and so only some of our audience will understand it. But Monsma and Vendelin's church order commentary really gets into what I'm seeing is from Bavinck when it comes to the threefold office of prophet, priest, king is represented in the offices of the church, is represented kings as the elders. I think the priests are the deacons and the prophets are the pastors. And in the 70s, the CRC underwent a shift, kind of getting away from that. And I would say the reason for getting away with it was an emphasis on the priesthood of all believers. And it probably threw the baby out with the bathwater on that one. But all that to say, like I'm seeing in Bavinck that there's a rich history of that. But also Bavinck brings up how Bavinck tries to bring these things together. He does mention the threefold office, but he also talks about how believers have a threefold obligation to join the church, to use their gifts for the benefit of the body, and to be active in the formation and reformation of the church. And that's an incredible thing that when we think about government, again, this is all coming from a government section or polity section in the Reformed dogmatics, that it's not just about leadership, right? I preached yesterday. I'm preaching on Jesus' I am statements. And so I am the gate and I am the good shepherd. And so when we think about the hired hand, or when we better yet think about the watchman, one of the applications that can be made is that the office bearers of the church are tending to the sheep, but they're also sheep themselves. And I think the Reformed the Reformed theology when it comes to polity, yes, it emphasizes that there is an office, there is a gifting that God has put among his people. But still, we are part of the flock, and the priesthood of all believers is an extremely important thing. And I think that's a really important thing for this moment in the CRC. As much as we talk about what Synod is doing, and people are making decisions, and it can seem like we're becoming almost like a what Bavinck I think would refer to as like an episcopal government, kind of like the Catholic Church. That is not what we are to be, and so it's a good thing to check ourselves that we're not trying to do that. We're not trying to have too much authority that isn't scriptural.
That's all we have for this week. If you want to help us out and support the Messy Reformation, another thing you can do is sign up for our newsletter through Substack. That way you'll get episodes and summaries sent directly into your email inbox. It also gives us the ability to communicate with our audience, which is one of the biggest struggles of a podcast. So head over to the Messy Reformation on Substack and sign up for our newsletter. But until then, don't forget this is Christ's church, and he bought it with his blood. And we've been warned that wolves will come in trying to destroy the flock. So keep a close watch on your life and on your doctrine. Preach the word in season and out of season, and keep fighting the good fight in this messy Reformation.